What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reassembling our Dana 18. Here I got a minor rebuild kit. Going to go over this real quick. So it's going to come with all your small parts, your shifter detent balls, your thrust washers, your needle bearings, your rear housing shims, your shaft bearings, a new intermediate shaft, shifter springs, gasket kit, and more. So this is the same kit that's available at Southern Jeep and 4x4.com, and we'll go ahead and get started on the reassembly. Alright, so before we mess with the case, we're going to go ahead and get the front housing rebuilt. So we're going to put a new bearing, new snap ring. We're going to reuse the old front output shaft. There's nothing wrong with it. We got shift fork cleaned up and the shift rail, and there's going to be a couple other parts. So we're just going to go ahead and put our bearing in. Kind of just a little crooked. All right, got it in there enough for the snap ring groove. Now that snap ring's kind of a pain. There's no tabs on it. So that's what that notch is for right here. It's a lot easier to take out than put in. Alright, so I got it in. I just got one side in and then kind of just spun it around. So now we're going to go ahead and install our front lip seal. So this is a double lip seal. This is going to help reduce oil leaks. Alright, and now we got our shift rail seals. Alright. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install our front shaft. Just going to slide it through the bearing, and it's a slit fit, so it's going to take you a brass hammer or a brass drift and just have it fit snugly against the bearing, like so. Alright, so I went ahead and put the shift rail in. So now there's two plugs on either side that's going to remove your poppet ball and springs and your interlock. So this is the interlock. This is going to be removed. This inhibits the transfer case for going in two-wheel drive, low range. So there's cuts in the shafts to where if you have it in full-wheel drive, it won't let you put the range in low. So kind of a popular upgrade, removing this. Just be a little cautious. You know, don't be dumping the clutch and stuff in two-wheel drive low, or you know, you can run the risk of over torquing your rear axle. That's why they put it in there, to, you know, reduce the risk of that. So we're going to drop our ball in, a spring, and then the plug. Just going to put the plug in hand tight, make the rail a little bit easier to move around for testing and stuff. Alright, so now that that's in, we're going to install our full drive, two-wheel drive engagement gear along with the shift fork. So that's going to go on like so. It's going to just kind of slide in. And this gear is going to mesh with your front shaft. And then our shift fork, we got this set screw here, which I'm going to tighten up, and then it gets safety wired in. So what we'll probably have to do to accomplish that, make it easy on me, just pull the whole rail out, and then I'll just tighten the set screw up and then put some safety wire around it. So go ahead and... Alright, so I got the tie wire installed, everything's ready to go. So before we install it, we got to go ahead and put in our bearing and then our main shaft, and then that's going to get put on. The shift housing is going to get put on. Alright, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves with the main shaft, go ahead and put your high and low shift fork in and shift rail. Got some tie wire on the holding bolt. We got one bearing on the shaft already, so we're going to slide our gears on. So right here we got our low range gear, this is the sliding gear, and then this is the high range gear. So we're going to go ahead and plop in our low range into the fork, and then if you notice, you got teeth on the front of, on the back of this, on the back of the high range gear. We're going to go ahead and slide the shaft in, just line up your tabs. So it's going to hit and stop. So we're going to just pull it back. Now we're going to take our thrust washer. Notice how it has two tabs, and you'll see two splines on the shaft go all the way through. So it's just going to slide in through there like that, rest up against the gear, and then now we need to install a snap ring. So it looks like it's this one. It's thinner, and luckily this snap ring doesn't have a lot of tension on it, so we could probably get lucky and not have to fight it too much. I'm gonna go ahead and fight with this off camera. I'm running out of battery. Alright, so I got the snap ring on. Wasn't too hard. It just had to really get in here and I'd be blocking the camera. So now I'm installing the bearing cone. So it's gonna be gear, thrust washer, snap ring, then your bearing cone, and that bearing cone is gonna face out for a race to go in this way. This is just a slip fit, so just take your little Scotch-Brite the inside of your race, Scotch-Brite your shaft. When you're cleaning it and everything, put a light layer of grease, and they go on pretty easy. And you need to make sure that you're ready to, because these bearings, really the only way to get them out without the special bearing puller, it's kind of like a pickle fork that goes in here. I haven't found a pickle fork that works for this, but in the Jeep book there's some kind of old pickle fork style tool they use to slip these bearings out. And the main one to be careful of is your back bearing, because of the shoulder on the shaft. It's basically impossible to try to get something in there to wedge between the bearing and the shaft, and you'll wind up destroying the cage. It's very important that you do it in the right sequence. As far as installing this bearing, 1.25 inch deep socket fits perfectly over the shaft and is long enough to go without hitting the shaft. Mine is missing in action. I spent about 5 minutes looking for it. So I got the bearing about halfway there. So what I did is I put the nut on the main shaft and I got it resting against my vise here. And I'm just going back and forth with the punch. It's moving every time. It's a very, you make a lot of progress. It's just you got to have something solid to hit on. My brass drift will probably work a little bit better. Just make sure you keep going back and forth. And you're just going to keep going till it bottoms out. Which looks like we might be there. So just slide your, here, let me move this over. So just slide your high gear back a little bit and check your gap. So yeah, we got just a little bit more to go. It's gonna basically stop on that snap ring. So go ahead and finish this up off camera and do the next step. All right, so now we're gonna install the bearing race. Pretty simple. So this front race here is going to be non-adjustable. I already got the back race in here, and we're going to set, there's going to be shim packs in the back. I'll show you here in just a minute. I got this back one a little too tight, so what we'll do is we'll get the front seated up against the cone and then drive out this race. And then we'll install our rear speedometer, pretty much our rear output where the speedometer gear is located, and there's going to be shim packs, and we got to check end play of the shaft. Make sure it's within spec with the factory shims that it came with. They're in great shape, going to reuse them. So putting those back in there, we should have the same, we should have a good end play measurement. We're just going to verify it and basically show you if your shims were screwed up for some reason and you had to shim one from scratch, that process would be exactly the same. You can see we're spinning now, so you can see how the transfer case works. So right now we're in low range. I'll show you when we get the intermediate gear in. But anyway, let's check our end play. I'm going to go ahead and eyeball the shim packs up. Looks like they're good. And we will install our front shifter housing. That way this race is secured, and any adjustments that may be necessary are all going to be on the rear. So let me go ahead and get the front shifter housing set up. Alright, so don't laugh at my RTV job. The cone got a little hard, hardened up, so I had to just do it straight out of the tube. just going to slide your shift rail over. There we go. Gotta give it some love taps. So now we're gonna put our bolts back in. Make sure you put RTV on these bolts. These are all through threads. So you got leak points, because these things are very leaky. This thing's still probably gonna leak it even after being rebuilt. It's just the nature of the beast with these. As soon as I come up with a permanent solution, I will let y'all know. Just kind of a disclaimer. I'm sure y'all watching that have these know what I'm talking about when it comes to leaks. So when we tighten this down, that's going to put pressure against the race on the front. It's kind of hard to do with the camera in the way. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. Check back in. All right, so one thing I forgot to mention real quick is depending on your transfer case, these bolts will have holes drilled in them for tie wire. This particular one doesn't. It's got the star lock washers. I know my MV does. It's got tie wire. I can't remember if it's got lock washers or if I put both. If I, use the original bolts and put lock washers. But it's pretty important that these don't back out, because this is your mount. So this is what mounts the transfer case to the cross member, and then the rest of it's mounted via the transmission here. So it's pretty important these bolts stay tight. This went 63 years without tie wire. Didn't come with them from the factory. I doubt this thing's ever been apart. I'd probably got a better chance of winning the lottery than this thing being taken apart before me. But anyway, so now, as you can see, our bearing race is poking out now. So we got our preload on the front set where we need to, and we'll just eyeball our sims, which look pretty good. And then we got our rear speedometer housing, and then it's got a little recess for the bearing race. So I'll go ahead and get the dial indicator set up, and we'll check that in play. All right, so here's how I have the dial indicator set up. Got a mag base. Got it on the shoulder here of the shaft, not on the very end. Got a little bit more bite. Got the preload set on the dial indicator. I went ahead and checked it with the stock shims that it came with, and it's pretty tight. I think there's like a thousandths. The book calls for 4 to 8. So the minor rebuild kit comes with new shims. So I'm going to add, these are 7 thousandths a piece. I'm going to go ahead and start with 2 since our reading is so tight. So we're going to add 14 thousandths total to it and see what that brings us out to. Really the time consuming part is just getting the dial indicator set up and taking the cap off and then putting the new shims back on. So let me do that real quick. And so I added 14 thousandths. Got the dial indicator zeroed out. Now we have too much. We have about 9.5 thousandths. So I'm going to take the cap off again and then remove one of those thin 7,000 shims, and we should be good to go. Alright, last time. So I got a little bit of pressure on it. Got it at 0, letting it go. Its gravity's going down. You can take the pry bar, put a little bit of pressure on it. And we have 6. So we are right on the money. We're between 4 and 8. So we're perfect. So now take this all off. We're just going to leave this cap on here temporarily The bolts, I should say, because the park and brake backing plate's going to bolt on, is going to use these bolts to, mount the backing plate for the parking brake. That's going to be the very last thing we do because it's just going to get in the way of everything. So, all right, the next step is going to be the intermediate gear and shaft. So we got more needle bearing action for that. So let me get this all cleaned up. All right, so now we're going to do the intermediate cluster gear. Just a quick inspection on the gear. This looks brand new. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, no wear. I don't think this thing's been shifted but maybe a handful of times, if that. So this is going to be the latest version of the Dana 18. So this is going to have an 1.25 inch intermediate shaft, and it's going to be suspended by roller bearings. The previous generation was an 1.8 inch shaft that was suspended with cage bearings, or pretty much like a cage roller bearing. I had some laying around somewhere. I don't know where they are to show you. And then the first version that's found in your MBs, GPWs, and early CJ2As was a 3/4 inch shaft with caged roller bearings. So those are much easier and much easier to rebuild, less time consuming, but they're not as strong. They went to the individual bearings for more strength. So let's get started. So we got 3 washers. Let me get my knife out. This is going to assemble just like the cluster gear on the transmission, just has less bearings, which is nice. So we're going to go ahead and use our transmission assembly lube again, our good and tacky stuff. I'm going to go ahead and coat the whole inside. Like I said, I've never tried it with grease. I don't know, if you get a real tacky grease, if that'll help. I've always used this stuff. It's I think it's got a little bit of wax in it. Makes it a little bit thicker and tackier, in my opinion, than just regular old grease. And we're going to do the same thing with the washer, because we're going to put this one all the way at the bottom. Get that started. We're going to get a good glob and just start coating these needle bearings. I'm going to just go ahead and do one section of it. There's going to be 2 sections. Hopefully you see it on the camera. We're just going to go ahead and stack in there. Rest on that washer. It might be a little bit crooked doing the first one because it's pretty much like out of the gear. It's just resting on the workbench right now, but it'll straighten out once we get the other side. And this is a common this shaft and bearing is a common issue on these transfer cases. If you're starting to get a lot of whine and noise and stuff like that, this is the first thing you should check. When you start to wear, you get a lot of excessive thrust on the gear and your bearings and shafts start to wear out. And this can be done in the Jeep. You can remove this gear and do this on the bench and install it back in the transfer case while it's still in the Jeep. It's the big thing is just getting the shaft through the transfer case without getting these little roller bearings knocked off and messed up, because if you do that, you're gonna have to restart everything. Alright, so now we're ready to install the intermediate gear. Got the rest of the roller bearings put in. Pretty straightforward. So now we're going to go ahead and put our thrust washers in. I already got one in on the back side, and you got a tab, steel side and brass side. Your brass side goes towards your gear, and then the notch will go in the notch portion of the case. Put a little bit more assembly lube on it. So what I like to do is, you're gonna have to really get crazy with trying to get the gear in with both the thrust washers in, and you can't really drive it in with that tab being on the bottom. If it was on the top, you could just drive it straight through. I don't know why they put the tab on the bottom, the machine part for it on the casting, you know, for you to install them after the fact. But anyway, so what I do is I got an old shaft here, ground it down, because the front of the transfer case, the bore for the shaft is smaller. So because you can only install the shaft from the back to the front. So what I do is I kind of take this shaft to hold in that thrust washer, and then I'll take the new one, put it in to hold the back thrust washer. You gotta kind of just get it to where it's gonna hold it but not interfere with putting the gear in. And then we'll just double check our roller bearings are still in there and install it. So we want to make sure you kind of, there we go, hopefully you can see that better. Kind of put your hand in from the back there. It's gonna be kind of a tight fit. With this gear doesn't have a lot of wear, and these thrust washers are new. Looks like we're just interfering with the shaft a little bit. Now don't start taking a metal hammer to this. Just give it some back and forth taps. Also helps if you move your sliding gear out of the way. That's going over to the side a little bit. We'll just move it over a little bit. If I can find my pry bar, there it is. There we go. We're going to put some light pressure on the new shaft. Maybe give it some taps to see if it starts going through. Now you want to be careful, because if you get this not straight, you'll just knock off those roller bearings. We'll have to reset them. So now, and our back thrust washer fell off the shaft. So what I'm going to do, which is not a big deal, we'll just get a pry bar in there or punch something and just slide up the thrust washer like so. I'm gonna get it. There we go. Just to get my longer pry bar. Yeah, in the manual, it mentions something about a dummy shaft. And I think they want you to put that dummy shaft in first. It's probably a few thousandths smaller all the way around than the new one, and you kind of just use the new permanent shaft that's going in and just drive it out straight, you know. So our needle bearings look good up front here. Go ahead and push it in some more, which looks good. And before we put the shaft all the way through, there's a new design on the shaft too that I totally forgot about because it was missing in the minor rebuild kit. I had to go out of one of my other intermediate shaft kits and get the O-ring. They machined, so here's an original. So here's the back of the shaft. As you can see, it's just straight all the way. So what they did to reduce oil leaks is they machined a groove right here, and they give you an O-ring. The theory is to reduce oil leaks. To be honest, I haven't noticed any change or anything like that with oil leaks on my transfer case because I did, like I mentioned, upgrade to this shaft. And I do remember now putting the O-ring in. So I'm just going to put a tad bit of oil on it so it doesn't burn the seal installing it. Maybe you can see it better. We're just going to put it on. There we go. Fits in there pretty good. And then I already checked the roller bearings one last time. They're good. And then before we drive it all the way home, I'm going to turn the notch so the plate will fit. And go ahead and drive it on home. Yep, we're good. I don't remember it being such tight of a fit. Probably have to drive it out a little bit. I don't remember it being an issue with mine right off the top of my head. Try it again. Looks like it's just pushing the O-ring out. That's all the way seated. Yeah, it came right off. All right. And the O-ring is toast. Well, another thing I can do, because now I'm worried with that machined ledge in there, that now that's going to be a definite pass-through. what I could probably do is drive it back out a little bit and then just put a real light layer of RTV on there and see what that does. Alright, so I'm going to do, now that we got all the gears in, we're going to put the cover on them before I put the cover on, and then flip it right side up like it's supposed to be, and we'll assemble the parking brake, bolt it up, and then put our shift levers on, and it's ready to be bolted to the transmission, then onto the cross member, transmission mounts, all that good stuff, and then mounts it into the frame. So before we put the cover on, I'll give another quick overview now that it's fully assembled on how it works. So right now, we have our intermediate gear here, okay? So our output gear for our transmission bolts here. Attached to the output shaft of the transmission is your output gear that goes in through the cover here, bolts onto the shaft of the transmission, and that supplies power to your intermediate gear. So right now we're in neutral. So if I hold the, should be in neutral, hold on. There we go. So right now, how we're sitting, the transfer case is in neutral. So as you can see, our output is not spinning anything, we're just kind of freewheeling here. So if we want low range, this sliding gear comes down, and now we have low range. So if you notice on your high range gear, here, let me prop this up real quick. Let me look through the viewfinder, hopefully. Here. Just noticed the viewfinder was dirty. Hopefully the video didn't get too screwed up. But anyway, we're in low range here. And if you notice on our high range gear, it's not spinning at the same speed as our low range. So right now all the power is being supplied through the gear reduction and being transmitted out the output shaft. So we got low range operation. Then we bring it up. Kind of hard to do one-handed. There we go. So now the high range, it locks it over. The low range gear locks over the high range gear. So now the shaft, the output shaft is now directly coupled to the high range. So now we have our high range speed. So that's why this is a non-synchronized transfer case. I know some transfer cases have a synchronizer set up and stuff. The Deuce and a Half does, the M35A2s do, where you can use it as a splitter. This does not. So if you're moving and everything, you might get lucky a couple times, but I mean, you can see these straight teeth, and it's got to just all mesh together perfectly. That's why it's good to always come to a complete stop. Shift it. If it doesn't want to shift, just kind of feather the clutch a little bit and it'll drop right in. So hopefully that goes over the operation. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and get the parking brake built as an assembly on the bench. At least I'm going to attempt to. Hopefully the springs don't fight me too bad. If they do, I'll just mount the backing plate on the transfer case and then build it while it's on the transfer case. But anyway, we got our adjuster set up, our adjuster hold down bolt, brake shoes, our eccentric spring, and our two upper and lower springs. So right now the parking brake is facing as it would be on the Jeep. It's backwards on the upside down on the camera, but your big square here is going to be on the bottom. So that's going to be on the bottom of the Jeep, and then your brake shoes are going to mount horizontally. So we're going to, your brake shoes, you got a long side and a short side. The long side is going to go on your pivot point. The first thing we're going to install is our eccentric. So that's going to go underneath here. like that. We'll go ahead and put our eccentric spring on. So this other end is going to attach to the engagement lever, which we'll put on later. So we'll just go ahead and back this up a little bit, pull the spring back, and then it fits snugly in the eccentric. So how this is going to work is on that eccentric is a cam basically, and when this goes, when you engage it, it presses the shoes opposite ways against the drum. So we're going to leave that like that. Go ahead and put our shoes in. Before we put our shoes in, we'll go ahead and put our adjuster in. So it's going to be just a single fine thread 3/8 bolt. Right, then we'll put our eccentric back in. I got the adjuster backed all the way in. Let's go ahead and put our shoes in, so you can kind of see already what it's shaping up to be. Now we're going to take our lower spring, and it's going to go underneath probably go ahead and put in our upper spring as well. Now they're both going to go under the tabs here. There we go. All right. That was a lot easier than I was expecting. So it's that easy. Took just a couple minutes. So now we'll go ahead and mount this on the transfer case, and we'll put our engagement lever in, put our park and brake drum on, and be ready. Alright, so I got the park and brake attached. One thing I forgot to mention is before you install everything, tighten down your acorn nut on the back side of this, because you can't access it once the brake shoe's on. I mean, it'll take you literally 30 seconds to take these shoes back off. And I did it to where there's about 1 or 2 threads exposed on the back jam nut. So this is how it works. We got our lever on. And when you install it, make sure you go ahead and slip your lever into the backing plate and hook it onto the spring, because there's no way to get the lever in there once you have the backing plate on. So this is going to attach to your park and brake handle and cable and all that. And the eccentric's going to move. And it's going to move the shoes up and down. So we'll further adjust it once we have the drum on, and we can access the adjusters through the drum. There's holes in it. You'll see here in just a minute. Alright, so here's the drum. You need to put your drive shaft and yoke bolts in. These are 1¼ grade 8 3/8 bolts. You want to use 1¼ because they're going to be the right length, and make sure they're grade 8 and make sure they have a shank on it, because this is what's going to be holding your drive shaft on, and they're the correct length to go through the yoke, the output yoke, and then the yoke on the drive shaft, and then give you about a thread or 2 extra once you put the nut on for the drive shaft. Because if you put them on too long, they'll bind up on your drive shaft. So I got the felt washer. I soaked it in gear oil, but didn't soak it too much. So, and then also I put some gear oil around where it's going to be riding on the seal. So we're going to take our drum and then our yoke. It's going to go through the bolts. Now, you can weld these bolts in. I've done it before. I don't recommend it because of binding. You want a little bit of play in them when you're trying to bolt the drive shaft up. But if you're having problems keeping the bolts in there, you know, go ahead and do it. But this is a new drum and new bolts, and you can see the hex portion of the bolt is riding on the drum. So I test fitted the drum. It should slip back on there unless the shoes screwed up on me. Here, we'll do it without the there we go. All right. So after you got the drum on, just go ahead and drive your yoke in, and you'll see it's a rectangle pattern. So just match up the rectangle with the bolt on the drum. All right. So now the last step's going to be the shift handles. Went ahead and put the poppet ball in, do the spring, and then the plug for the high range, low range shift fork. I purposely left it out until now, so go ahead and tighten that up later off camera. Getting kind of high up there in time. So we got new. We're going to go ahead and get our shifter pin in. You want to make sure the grease ports in here are freed up, not plugged while you got it out. We're going to go ahead and get our spring on. Going to take our range fork. And then we're going to put the spring in between, but not any tension on it. And then we're going to take our front axle engagement lever. Push our pin through. And I thought I heard the other spring just fall off on me. There it is. Oops. Wrong way. There we go. It's been a long day. Alright, so we got the pin in, and then we'll go ahead and rotate our springs. There we go. And last but not least, we have a set screw that's going to hold the pin in. Alright, so now that's going to get tie wire, and basically you're just going to tie it around the vent. Like I mentioned earlier, on the earlier transfer cases, the bolts that held the front housing on had tie wire, and you'd all tie wire it together, but on this, it's going to go behind the vent and be good to go. Then put you a couple pumps of grease in there, and we got some shift and shift forks, so you can see we go on all ranges now. So that's the low range, 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, low range, 4-wheel drive high, and then 2 high. So alright, the last thing to do after I tie wire and then tighten these plugs up is put the yoke on. So that's going to get another felt seal. Remember to soak it in oil, and just put it around your yoke and put the yoke on, and we'll have a done transfer case. Alright, so here it is all mounted up. Gonna get one more coat of paint, and then I just gotta put some oil, fill it up with oil, and then put the cover on, and then wait to decide if it's getting an overdrive installed or not. So, alright, well, I appreciate y'all watching, and have a good one.